But what happened was in 2005, well, let me go back to 2000. In 2000, there wasn't a whole lot of regulation about contract for deed. Now, contract for deed, for those that are listening that may not know, there's owner finance, contract for deed, and lease options. And owner finance, although contract for deed is it is owner finance, your typical owner finance is the buyer gets a note, a mortgage created by the seller, okay, and they get the deed, which is the title of the house. Contract for deed, they get the mortgage, the note, but the investor or the seller doesn't give them title until they pay off the note.
Correct.
It's a contract for that deed. Well, in 2000, what happened was a tornado went through downtown Fort Worth and took out an area east of downtown that a group of investors had sold to Hispanics, okay, undocumented Hispanics, on contract for deed. So when the tornado hit, these people had no house, they lost their down payment, and then it turns out, yeah, the investors, yeah, they weren't really paying insurance. So Mike Moncrief went to work with an attorney there in Fort Worth off Hewlin Street, Charles. I know the attorney. I've met with him. He's very brilliant. He's reviewed all my stuff as well. And they drafted a tremendous amount of legislation for Title II, Chapter 5 of the Property Code. Okay, Title II, Chapter 5 is about conveyances. It's basically about contract for deed. Okay. So what happened then? It became such a pain to do contract for deed. Investors stopped doing them. And really, the main reason they were doing contract for deed is the idea was that if someone defaulted, you just foreclose. I mean, you just evict. You don't foreclose. Okay. So now let's fast forward to 2005. The laws cover, landlord and tenant laws. They cover contract for deed, but they don't cover lease. They don't say anything about lease options. So they drafted a preliminary legislation simply stating that a lease option was an executory contract, and you couldn't do an executory contract that had a mortgage on it, okay, or a lien on it. So that was basically going to put me out of business. So at the time, I mean, tons and tons of investors contacted their representatives and everything, faxing them, because that goes way back, faxing, emailing, calling, everything. And finally, they made major amendments to the original bill. And the final bill, was very, very workable. So when the final bill was passed and signed by Rick Perry, I went to work, staying up till about 2:30 in the morning, going through the bill and line iteming every part of it, and going back to then I had to take that and go over to contract for go over to property code and see, well, how does this fit in? It was a little bit of a pain, having to read it, whatever, sew it together and figure out how it all worked. But at the end of the day, I was able to see, this is very workable. We've got to do this, and this. So then I went to work making those changes, then working with more than one attorney, more than one firm, to have our contracts redraft, not totally redraft, but making those changes, this and that. And so I ended up spending about $30,000 in legal fees to have the contracts done. Yeah. And so the law really didn't change us. It really didn't slow us down any. But there were things that, for example, if there's a mortgage on the property, the owner has to disclose that mortgage information, okay, and state when the payments are being made. The buyer has to be able to see that the house is not in foreclosure. The seller has to have feasible title. Well, Connor, I can't tell you how many real estate attorneys, even to this day, 11 years later, that I have to explain to real estate attorneys the difference between fee simple title and a mortgage. Because they think, you can't do a lease option on a house with a mortgage because the seller has to have fee simple title. Fee simple title is how we hold title in the state of Texas. That's how they hold title in almost every state. It has nothing to do with a mortgage, okay? It's two separate things. But because the seller has to have feasible title, you cannot do a sandwich lease option in Texas per the law.
Okay.
Because remember, we were talking about, how we described a sandwich lease option, SLO, how it is you're sandwiched between there.
Yep.
It's an A, B, and BC transaction. Okay. Well, on the BC side, it's you, the investor, and the C is the end buyer. Okay. The seller is the A, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So it's A, B, C. Well, on that BC transaction and the sandwich lease option, you're the seller, right? You're selling a lease option to the end buyer. You don't have fee simple title. The owner does. Okay. So you can't do a sandwich lease option in Texas.
Yep.
Now you can do an assignment because you're not the seller on the contract. You're not acting as a seller.
Okay.
You're just assigning your contract, right?
Yep.
So you can do an assignment all day long. But there's things you can't do, like you can't lease option a house that's in default of the mortgage. Okay. You cannot do a sandwich lease option on a house that has a lien other than the mortgage. Okay. So you can't do a lease option on a house that has, say, a HELOC, okay, or mechanics lien, that type of thing. There's the big confusion is people think you can't do them over 180 days.
Okay. Yep.
All it is that if it's less than 180 days, there's nothing special you have to do about it, nothing special. But if it's more than 180, less than 3 years or 36 months, then you have to have the verbiage that the law requires, et cetera. The confusion comes in with, and I don't know if can you see this okay?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. This is Title II, Chapter 5 of the Property Code in Texas. Okay? So what happens is people think that all of this is for a lease option. It's not. The law is very clear and states that only 6 sections of all this even apply to a lease option. It even goes further and says, almost like for clarification, all these following sections don't even apply to a lease option. But yeah, people can get confused and think this is about a lease option. No, there's some sections that do apply, but this is about contract for deed.
Yep.
And so that's a lot of confusion that people still have about Texas lease options.
Now, what would happen? Let's go a little bit deeper. What would happen if it went past that period between 18 months and 3 years? What would happen?
Then, per the law, it basically becomes a contract for deed.
Okay.
It would become a contract for deed that the seller wouldn't be able to abide by the law on, because there's requirements in there specifically for a contract for deed that have nothing to do with the lease option, such as you have to provide amortization, a yearly amortization. Well, there's no amortization on a lease option.
Yep. Right?
How do you do that? So basically, you just don't want to do it beyond three years. Plus, here's the thing, Connor. One of the reasons our success rate's so high on getting people financed is because we do 12-month contracts. The longer the term of a lease option, if you go, say, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, the likelihood of that buyer buying that property goes down dramatically, Yep. Because they've been there for so long. Life happens. In 5 years, they've either kids have moved or they've had kids, they need a different house, job relocation, something has happened. And, they just don't want to buy the house anymore. So we keep it very short and we get them financed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so clearly, guys, he's done his research. That's pretty impressive, to be honest, John, that you would actually have the laws come out and you instantaneously just like, I'm going to figure this out and make sure, because, obviously it's your livelihood, but not many people are going to take that action. So
I did it that night. As soon as it passed, boom.
You didn't want to wait a little bit?
Nah.
So guys, if you're looking to do this, especially in Texas, clearly you need to go talk to an expert like John. He has events that we'll talk about coming up, but also you can reach him online. Now let's talk about, if they do want to do it, some of the benefits and different opportunities that come up from being able to have this lease option club in your bag, as you would say, right? So for wholesalers who are looking for traditionally low price properties, which everybody's looking for right now, if they could wholesale these properties that people want retail for using lease option strategy that you're teaching, it'd open up a big part of business that they're not capitalizing on right now. So explain to them, the wholesalers right now, the benefit to doing lease options.
Oh, yeah. If you're a wholesaler not doing lease options, you are really, really losing a ton of money because you're paying for the leads, however you're doing it, whether it's through multiple avenues such as bayonet signs, direct mail, which is the most expensive way, by the way. Yeah. Whatever you're utilizing, you're bringing leads in. Now, I do wholesaling as well. Okay, so I'm not anti-wholesaling, but I realize that you've got to have, if you're doing wholesaling, you're going to bring leads in where they're just not going to take 50 cents on the dollar.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I'm looking right here. We're late on this call, my fault, because I was talking to a seller. Here's just these are less than a week old. Of all these are lease option leads. Okay,